For decades, the tug of war over Iran's nuclear program has shaped one of the most intense economic standoffs in history. While Iran has long insisted its nuclear goals are strictly for civilian use, think medicine and energy, the West has remained skeptical, leading to a massive web of sanctions that have essentially tried to unplug Iran from the global grid. To understand how this works, you have to look at the two main tools, primary and secondary sanctions. Primary sanctions are straightforward. They prohibit US citizens and companies from doing any business with Iran. But the real teeth come from secondary sanctions. This is where the US tells a company in, say, Europe or Asia that if they trade with Iran, they are banned from the American financial system. However, we are seeing a massive shift right now that could change everything. Just in the last few days, China has made an unprecedented move by formally declaring that it will not recognize or comply with these US sanctions. Beijing has invoked its blocking statute for the first time, essentially ordering its domestic companies and refineries to ignore Washington's restrictions and continue trading with Iran. China's argument is that these sanctions are an illegal overreach of US law into other countries' business. By openly defying this blockade, China is essentially daring the US to either back down or risk a full-scale financial war by sanctioning major Chinese banks. It's a turning point that suggests that the era of the US being able to unilaterally lock a country out of the global economy might be coming to an end as major powers begin to build their own systems that ignore Western rules of the road entirely. So now let's take a deeper look at what can happen with the deal between Iran and the US that we are hearing of. And of course, some of its very important aspects include the lifting of sanctions, which is the demand coming from Iran. Is that something that would be doable and possible for the Americans? Let's try and understand where this could go. I'm joined by Mr. Stephen J. Fallon. He's a geopolitical risk advisor and founder of DBM Consulting. He specializes in the intersection of finance, security, and international strategy, and his work focuses on the Middle East and West Asia. Mr. Fallon, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So we are, of course, hearing that there is some kind of a deal which may be in the offing. Pakistan is waiting for the Iranian response, which should be coming shortly. Iran's long-standing demand has been the lifting of sanctions, and we've seen in the JCPOA that some of those sanctions were indeed lifted. So this time around, where the war stands now and the kind of leverage that Iran has or displayed, based on that, do you think they will demand the lifting of both primary and secondary sanctions as some sort of a non-negotiable demand or deal?
That's a good question, and depending on which versions of the various memorandums that are flying around you look at, they'll be a bit different. My understanding is that based upon the 10-point plan from early April that was submitted by Iran, that both primary and secondary sanctions are a starting point for the negotiations. And as you alluded to, under JCPOA, secondary sanctions were removed. However, primary sanctions continue to be a problem, and I believe that this time around, Iran has learned from this and knows that it needs to tackle both primary and secondary sanctions. So for a lasting peace and for a lasting agreement, they need to manage both.
So just to educate our viewers, the primary sanctions were not lifted in the JCPOA, and they've been there since the very beginning. So there's been no period during which the primary sanctions were also lifted on Iran.
Not in force. Particular people, particular things may come and move off the list. But in force, it's been there now for, well, I should say the list of people on that list has been expanding, but it's effectively been there for 20 plus years now. Secondary sanctions are a more new phenomenon, effectively something invented during the Obama administration to put more pressure on Iran And for your viewers who are maybe not familiar with the distinction, the difference here is that primary sanctions are the rules by which anyone with a connection to the United States is prohibited from interacting with Iran. Secondary sanctions cover everyone else in the world. So, for example, this could be a rupee payment from Islamabad to somewhere in Tehran by two people who are not have any connection whatsoever with the United States, and it would still be prohibited under secondary sanctions. Whereas with primary sanctions, it's primarily with this idea of a U.S. nexus, a U.S. touch point.
So for Iran, primary sanctions would be the first priority.
No, I believe secondary sanctions would be the first priority, because it would make life easier for interacting with the non-U.S. financial system. So, for example, China, Russia, Pakistan, other places in the Middle East. But ultimately, to get relief at any real lasting level, they do need to, also tackle primary sanctions, because otherwise the whole international financial system won't care if only secondary sanctions are removed.
So from the American point of view, lifting secondary sanctions would be far more easier than primary ones?
I think from a technical perspective, it's much the same. It's just that primary sanctions would be more useful in the long term. So the expectation, I would assume, from the U.S. side is that they would need Iran to concede to more, and it's a bigger thing to give. But from a technical perspective of delivering it, no, it's much the same.
So as part of the negotiation and give and take, the Americans could, for example, say that, fine, if you do ABC, we are going to lift secondary sanctions and then keep the primary ones on till at a later stage you are able to comply to more of a demand. So this could be part of the negotiation.
That's absolutely possible to imagine that. Again, based on the remarks by Iran, they are looking for a lasting deal. And I would be surprised if they only start with secondary sanctions, because they ultimately know that the most frustrating part of the way that JCPOA played out when it was still alive in 2016-17 and until Mr. Trump withdrew from the deal in May 2018 was that primary sanctions were a block to having meaningful re-engagement by the international system back into Iran. So perhaps there's a short delay, but they ultimately know they need to tackle this issue as well.
But lifting both sanctions would be a huge win for Iran, for obvious reasons. Would it also be considered, would it be politically feasible for President Trump to actually, at this point, agree to the lifting of both primary and secondary sanctions?
I'm sure there'll be the same people in parts of the US system and in the Israeli system who would object to it. But I think that they would object to anything that is beneficial to making the world a more peaceful place. So, were I able to speak to him, I would say it's worth the cost of persevering on this and lifting both primary and secondary sanctions.
At the stage where we are, let's assume for a second that there is some sort of a deal that we are hearing of, and what is being reported is that both sides will agree to officially end the war. Iran will open the Straits of Hormuz. The US will lift the naval blockade, and then they will have a certain time, 30 days or however many days, to go over all the other agenda items that they need to negotiate on. And on the basis of that, for the Americans, of course, the key issue is the nuclear program. And that's where they want maximum concessions from Iran. And for Iran also, that's sort of a red line. So it'll be very difficult for them to, give too much away on their nuclear program. So the balance between flexibility on the nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions is the spectrum over which these negotiations will happen. That being the case, in your reading of where situations stand today,
yes,
which one of these two countries could get more concessions on this spectrum? And of course, we are talking in a relative sense.
In my view, the United States has lost the war. It just hasn't realized it yet. And I think that Iran is in the process of making that point perfectly clear to the United States. So I think that in the due course of time, Iran will probably have more concessions given to it.
But if that is the case, and I think thank you for being very clear and categorical. Always appreciate that. Uh, if the U.S. has lost a war, the concessions that it would be willing to give will only come about if it actually realizes that it has lost the war. I'm not sure whether they actually do that at this stage.
Agreed, and watching that process of the U.S. working through its loss is painful, I think, for everyone, both in the region and around the world to watch. It's tough. It's been clear to anyone since the ceasefire that where the ultimate direction of travel on this was, but day by day, I think the point becomes clearer and clearer. We see the U.S. constantly walking back on its maximalist demands, and from what I can tell, looking from the outside, Iran realizes it's in a stronger position and is being patient. It's effectively taken an approach of strategic patience, waiting for the US to come to this realization.
And of course, it's safe to assume that there will be some lifting of sanctions. I mean, without that, I don't foresee a deal happening. If that were to happen, how would that change? What kind of an impact would that have on Iran's economy, number one? And number two, how would that increase Iran's geopolitical influence in the region?
I mean, the impact in Iran would be just night and day. Effectively, what we've seen throughout the last 20 or so years of sanctions, really when they've been in force since the nuclear issue arose during the Ahmadinejad government, is that Iran has effectively lost a generation of economic growth, and it's just stagnated. And so I think what we'll see is hopefully we'll see funds emerging, funds being released, which is another one of Iran's demands, is that there will be the releasing of trapped funds all over the world. And in terms of the benefit to Iran, it would be a country of 92 million souls who would be, for the first time in 40 years almost, able to achieve real kind of economic prosperity. And I think that it could come to rival any of the large kingdoms or emirates in the region, particularly given its natural mineral resources.
One of the things that directly affects us also, Mr. Fallon, I'd like you to weigh on that also, is this Iran-Pakistan pipeline. It's a huge project, very important for us, for Iran. The Iranians have done their part of the building of the pipeline. We couldn't do it because of the sanctions. And we are an energy-starved country. So at what stage do you think these kinds of projects could be free from sanctions? Would that be I assume in the secondary when the secondary sanctions are lifted, that would mean that a project like the Iran-Pakistan pipeline would also have a green signal?
Look, I think that lifting sanctions would help, definitely, be they secondary or primary as well. In the case of this project, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the deal that ultimately is reached, and a deal will eventually one day be reached, it may take time, is we may see a number of these commercial components cooked into the deal. If there's one thing that I think credit is due to the Trump administration, is they're very commercially savvy, and they may see that there's a need to bake into any kind of deal lasting and viable and interesting commercial opportunities, something that was missing from JCPOA, which was a very noble endeavor, but at the same time was so aloof and in the clouds that it wasn't very specific about anything. And hopefully this time we'll see a better deal, a more commercially wise deal.
And, of course, we all hope that those kinds of deals actually come about, because they're going to benefit everybody in the region. So finally, I want you to give us a broad overview of what the region would look like once this conflict comes to an end. And I'm talking specifically about the Gulf region. Their economies have been battered. Their notion of security and safety has been shattered. They've fought each other. So once the dust settles and there is peace for however long it is, we don't know. But for now, what will this region look like in terms of economic integration and return to normalcy? Is that even possible?
I mean, it will be definitely a new normal. I don't think it will bear much resemblance to the past 40 or 50 years. I think we almost need to go around the state by state on this exercise, Mr. Hussein. And I'll start with the UAE. The UAE has fundamentally altered course with its strategic direction. It's now deeply aligned with Israel and the US. So its future is effectively, with Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv, not really with the rest of the region. So that will be an interesting long-term position with Iran. There'll be a lot of animosity. Many of the wounds that were mutually inflicted on each other during this war will take a long time to heal, and memories will drag. I think Saudi is very interesting in this. Obviously, is the real economic engine of the region. We've seen Saudi looking to other actors, China, Russia, others, for other opportunities, and the other states in particular will try to hedge, I presume, particularly looking around at places like Qatar and Oman. They'll try to sit in both camps. Really, I think that the war has shown that a new security guarantor for the region is needed. The US abysmally failed in preserving the GCC during this region, and that was very, very clear. I think that that's been clear to most people since the Israeli strikes on Doha last summer, that the US economic umbrella, it's porous and it's not reliable. And we'll see, I think more broadly, we'll see the US one way or another probably withdrawing to an extent from the region. Hard to know what the future looks like in this respect.
One more thing I need to, since we have you with us, a lot of discussion that happens here in Islamabad, in Pakistan, is that if things work out well, ultimately, and peace does actually break out, we've played a very important role, and Pakistan also has now, in some ways, become a major part of West Asia, and also the Gulf, not just confined to South Asia. We have excellent relations with Saudi Arabia, and after this whole conflict ends, people will recognize. They've already recognized that the kind of role that Pakistan has played. We are energy starved. We have serious energy problems. We've been looking for foreign investment. Based on the kind of role that we've played, the high profile that we've acquired, the strong relationship that we've built with the US, Saudi Arabia, of course, China, all the key players. How do you think Pakistan would be able to benefit economically? What should be our focus in terms of leveraging our role for our own economic strengthening?
Well, I would say that particularly as the principal mediator now, that Pakistan saw an opportunity to be relevant, and it really seized the bull by the horns, and I commend Pakistan for doing that. I understand why the more traditional mediators here for the Iran-US dyad were reluctant. I'm thinking particularly of Oman and Switzerland, who were both burned by their involvement in this when the US launched the war on the 28th of February. And I think that Pakistan saw an opportunity to try to build some bridges, and I commend them for it. Now, what that looks long term, I think that we're into an era of people hedging. I think that Pakistan will be, as you rightly mentioned, working on this pipeline to try and get access to Iran's energy. Obviously, Pakistan has a very important strategic relationship with China, which is increasingly relevant. So I see Iran and Pakistan, this whole kind of corridor across the middle of Asia, becoming more and more relevant, bypassing parts of the Gulf.
Well, we all hope that everybody can benefit once peace returns to this region, and specifically Pakistan. Because we really feel that we can do much more in this region once integration is deeper. Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen J. Fallon, for joining us and sharing your valuable analysis with us.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What we are seeing right now in the Persian Gulf is a massive shift, and frankly, it's the first real breathing room in the region has had in months. For weeks, it felt like we were on the inevitable path to a full-scale restart of the escalation, especially with the talk around Operation Project Freedom. But the entire dynamic changed the moment Saudi Arabia and Kuwait stepped up and refused to let the airspace or bases be used for that operation. It essentially pulled the plug on the military momentum and forced a global pause. That decision by the kingdom didn't just stop a military mission, it reopened a massive door for diplomacy. And that is exactly where Pakistan has stepped in to lead the way. We have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure this pause doesn't go waste. Because the US was forced to stop and rethink, we've been able to get everyone moving back towards the negotiating table. We aren't just passing messages, we are spearheading a framework that people are actually starting to believe in. The most promising signal we've seen just happened yesterday. You have the Iranian foreign minister sitting in Beijing, and from there he picks up the phone to call the Saudi foreign minister. That is a huge statement. It tells you that there is now a serious multilateral coalition that is exhausted by the bombing and the blockades and is finally ready for a way out. It shows that Iran and Saudi Arabia are finding common ground on regional stability, and they are looking to us to bridge the final gap with the Americans. Right now, we are in a critical waiting period. Iran is reviewing the latest proposals and is expected to share their formal response with us shortly. Once we have that, we will be taking it straight to the US. There are already strong signals coming out of Washington that a deal is closer than it has ever been. They realize that without the cooperation of regional partners like Saudi Arabia, a military-first approach is what we call a dead end. All of the hard work we've put in, the ceasefires we have negotiated, the 15-point plans, the endless hours of shuttle diplomacy, it all seems to be converging. We managed to turn a moment of potential disaster into a moment of genuine hope. With the Saudis providing that vital strategic support and Pakistan leading the diplomatic charge, we are finally seeing the end of the bombing and a real path to peace. It's a joint effort that proves when the region stands together, we can actually dictate our own future.